Man, it is good to be here. We've made it to our first morning. We've gathered together. We've sung God's praises. Impact is happening. You don't have to wait any longer. It's all around you. Now, some of you have been waiting for some time for this moment. Some of you have been counting the sleeps down until Impact started. Some of you are putting on Facebook and Twitter that you're so excited that you can't wait. And here it's all around you. You don't need to wait one moment longer. Because waiting for stuff is hard work. Seriously, I hate it when I have to wait for something. You know, it's mealtime at camp and you're hungry and you get to the dining room and you can see the food sitting there and the flavour of it is wafting up your nostrils and it's activating the stomach juices and you think, man, I am hungry. You're not the first group that's called up to go into the dining room. Every other group is getting called up. Everyone's enjoying their food. You're still sitting there. 15 minutes later, you finally get in there and get the food that's left. I hate waiting for stuff. It just annoys me so much. Like you get into high school. Like you start off in year 7. By the way, year 7s, I want to know, make some noise. Just starting year 7 right now. Guys, where are you? Wave at me, shout at me. Oh, okay. Isn't it wonderful to have the year 7s with us? Seriously. But can I tell you the problem with year 7? You get to high school and the teachers have a little spiel. It goes something like this. Well, now you're in high school. You're not little kids like you're in primary school. Now you're in high school. You've got to work hard. There's going to be assignments. There's going to be homework because you've got to get good grades. It really matters. And you're quietly thinking, hang on, the HSC is 6 years away. Do you understand, as someone in year 7, age 13, 6 years away to that exam that matters, that is like an eternity, and you've got to somehow wait for it. And I hate having to work for things that just sort of have this long-term payoff. Learning to drive is a little bit like that. Now, come on, our learner drivers, where are you? Come on. Yeah, oh, my goodness, look at them all. Stay off the roads, everybody. Do you know the torture they put you through when you've got your L plates? You have to rack up 120 hours of driving practice. Seriously. When Josh did his, when I taught him to drive, you only had to do 50 hours and that took an eternity to get there. When I had my L's, our family, we didn't have a car. I'd never sat in the front seat of a car before. I didn't know what the pedals did. I had 9 lessons. 4.5 weeks after I got my L's, I got my P's. I didn't have to wait for them. And when you get your license these days, the P's go forever. You get your red P's and then someone with a sense of humour designed you to have green P's. And you've got to have 3 years before you've got your full license. And you might be the best driver in the world, but you've got to wait an eternity for people to recognise it. Seriously, I hate it when I've just got to wait so long for something good to happen. Imagine that a rich, elderly relative of yours dies and they leave you everything in their will. And you didn't even know this person, was some distant second cousin, uncle person somewhere. But they had no children, they had no family, they leave their entire estate to you. And you're there in the solicitor's office and the will is read and you discovered that that relative that you hardly knew has bequeathed to you $1 million. And when you hear those words, your mind starts racing around like, ooh, how am I going to spend this? You're starting to dream of the stuff that you're going to do. You're starting to imagine how your life is going to be changed instantly. And as the solicitor keeps reading, and the $1 million will be forwarded to you when you have your 60th birthday. 60? Flippin' heck, I don't want to wait until I'm 60 to get this. My 60 is like old. I might be dead before I get to 60. Can you imagine the hassle of knowing you had the inheritance, but you don't get to enjoy it, you don't get to spend it for an eternity? And I understand the feeling you would come up with. You say, man, I want it all, and I want it now. And you know what? You can feel exactly that same thought when you come along here to a camp like this and you hear all this stuff about God and how big He is and how powerful He is and how mighty He is and how He rewards those who are His followers. You come here and you hear that, my God is so big, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do. And you're thinking, yeah, but it's all in the future. I got to wait till I die to meet up with Him. That inheritance that God says He's going to give me, I don't get it till I die. And it's wonderful to have that way there in the future, but God, what about right now? Right now, I need you. Right now, I want to see some changes. And it's easy to look at God and say, God, I appreciate what you've done, but God, I want it all and I want it now. Yeah, I know that God is there. I know that when I die, I'll go to heaven. I know I will enjoy Him for eternity. I know it's going to be brilliant. But why does my life have to be so difficult right now? God, thank you for the future inheritance, but can't you see, I need you now. I need to see some things happening in my life. I need to see some things changing. Maybe at home, mum and dad are just tearing away at each other and you try and stop it, but you want God to do something about it and nothing seems to happen. Maybe you're dreading going back to school shortly because things don't work out that well for you at school. You're not even sure why you're there, and there's stacks of kids that just pick on you and make life difficult for you. And you say, hey, God, what about fixing up that situation? For some of you, every morning when you wake up, you're not even sure it's worth the bother to live that day. You're just sick of it. It just grinds away at you. And you want to say to God, God, it's great you got all this stuff in the future, but you got to know, God, I want it all and I want it now, because often it's really difficult to be a teenager and often it's really difficult to be a Christian. And when you feel that all this stuff is going on and there's things going on in your life that are dragging you down, it's really easy to say to God, listen, why haven't you done something? I'm praying to you. It feels like you've abandoned me. The promises are there. Oh, I'll be with you. It doesn't feel like it. I feel like I'm facing it by myself and I feel like there is no help whatsoever. And it's really easy to say to God, I'm not even sure I want to follow you anymore. It feels like you have abandoned me. That is exactly what had happened in Isaiah's time. God's people, God's nation had been invaded by a foreign power. They'd been invaded by Babylon. Stacks of God's people were killed, and those that weren't killed were rounded up as slaves and transported to another country. They're off in Babylon, a strange culture. They don't understand what people are saying. They're not there in the city of God. They're not there with their temple. They're not there with Mount Zion to remember them as God. And they're sitting down as slaves, remembering the good old days when they were back in God's country. And they're feeling that God has dumped them there by the rivers of Babylon. They sat down and wept when they remembered Zion. That's the situation that God's people are in as Isaiah the prophet speaks to them. They are feeling betrayed by God. They're feeling let down by God. They're feeling abandoned by God, and God says to Isaiah, I want to raise you up and send them with a message. I want you to take a message which lets them know I am still in charge of this world, I still love them dearly, and I have not given up on them. This morning, as we look into the prophet Isaiah, we're going to see him speak to God's people who were captives, feeling abandoned. And I want to say this morning, God wants to speak to you. Whatever your situation, whatever is going on, however good, bad, or ugly you feel about the world, right now, God wants to meet with you and to show you what he's really like. So, it's reach for your Bibles. Get your Bibles with you. Just wave your Bibles around. There we are. Kindles, e-readers, and some old-fashioned paper Bibles. We are in Isaiah chapter 40. Isaiah chapter 40. And we're going to start halfway through Isaiah chapter 40, down in verse 12. And I want you to be open to understanding God in a way that you might never have understood him before. Because if you can wrap your brain about what God is going to teach us, it will blow your mind. Because today we're looking at the one and only God. Let's see the first thing that we discover about him. And we see he is more powerful than anything. Look at verse 12. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Or with the breadth of his hand marked out the heavens? Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket? Or weighed the mountains on the scales or the hills in a balance? These are questions being asked about God. Have a look at them and you'll see how God is so powerful. Back there in verse 12, it says, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? We like to talk about, the whole world is in God's hand. But just think about the Pacific Ocean. It's kind of big. Can you imagine how ginormous the Pacific Ocean is? Can you imagine that God holds that in the hollow of his hand? He holds every ocean of the planet in the hollow of his hand. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? That is God. There is no one like him. Let's keep going. Verse 12. With the breadth of his hand marked off the heavens. Now, I don't suppose anyone does this anymore. But you can measure things with the width of your hand. When I left school, I worked at Grace Brothers, which was taken over by Myer. I worked in their furniture section. I had to sell, coffee tables and kitchen tables and all those sorts of things. And there was this one customer we have. We called her Mrs. Tape Measure. She was an old lady. She had a big mole over her right eye and a walking stick, and she'd come in every day and say, hey, Sonny, measure that table for me. She never bought a thing. She just wanted everything measured every day. Now, I had to go and find a tape measure and I eventually worked out that my hand span is 9 inches wide. Now, I have no idea what that is in metrics, but it's 9 inches wide. So if I want to measure something, if I want to measure what's on this drum kit here, I can simply just this panel here, that's 9 inches, that's 18 inches, that's a little bit more. And so I could add another 5 inches onto the 18 inches, I get to 23 inches, and I'm thinking, 24 inches, it's 2 foot wide. She would come in and say, Sonny, you measure that kitchen table for me? I'd say, certainly, madam. And I'd get there and I'd measure it with my hands and I'd tell her the size. That didn't satisfy her. She made me get the tape measure. I get the tape measure and it was exactly the same as me measuring out the table. Now, can you imagine that people measure things by the width of their hand? Verse 12 says, God has marked out with the breadth of his hand, he has marked off the heavens. Can you imagine God measuring the heavens, measuring the sky, measuring the universe just by putting his hand across it and working out how big it is? That's how powerful God is. Verse 12 again. Who has held the dust of the earth in a basket? Do you know how much dust there is in your everyday life? Like you've only just moved into your cabins. I can guarantee there is dust everywhere. You know, at home when mum says, I want you to do the vacuuming, and you go around, you get bags and bags of dust. You know how much dust there is. That verse 12, simply says, God carries the dust of the whole earth. Now just imagine you had to vacuum the whole earth. You get your Dyson vacuum cleaner out and you've got to vacuum every single country and every single city and every single house and every single building and every single everything. Imagine you vacuum the whole lot and you had the dust of the earth. Verse 12 says, God carries it in a bucket. Verse 12 again, who has weighed the mountains on a scale? Now, I don't know, we've got a whole lot of mountains around here. There's a couple of hills, but try and think big mountains. You know, for all the Aussies out there, Mount Kosciuszko. Or think of Uluru perhaps. You know, a huge monolith in the centre of Australia. Try and imagine how big they are. Try and imagine standing at the bottom thinking, I've got to climb that. Verse 12 says, God pops that on the scales. You know, in cooking class, you've got to measure out, 125 grams of butter or something. It says that God can pick up a mountain and just whack it on the scales. That's how big he is. That's how mighty he is. The first picture we see of God here, just in that one verse, God is more powerful than anything. Here's the second picture. God knows everything. Look at verse 13. Who can fathom the Spirit of the Lord or instruct the Lord as his counselor? Whom did the Lord consult to enlighten him? Who taught him the right way? Who was it that taught him knowledge or showed him the path of understanding? You know, one of the things I love about working with high schoolers is that you guys still realise that you don't know everything. You actually know that someone who knows more than you has to instruct you. Like if you're learning to drive, it's kind of handy to actually have an experienced driver next to you. Either that or your parents. If you want to learn guitar, it's kind of cool to have a guitar teacher that can show you the correct way to do it. If you're in a sporting team, you know you need a coach to show you how to reach the highest level. If you're sitting for your HSC this year, hey, all the year 12s, give us a wave. Where are you? Just all the high-pitched people down the front. Can you imagine sitting for their exam? You kind of need a teacher or two to help you get there. You need the odd book or two to give you some information. You need to be able to access the internet to discover all your answers in Wikipedia. You've worked out you need someone to instruct you on how to do something new. So, who did God check with when he made the universe? Who did he go to give him some advice? Who could say to him, well, gee, when I made a universe, a few years ago, here's how I did it. Who did he check with? When he went onto YouTube and sort of got a demonstration video, was there a little video that said how to make a universe in 6 days? Did he check with anybody? Did someone give him some handy-dandy instructions on how to create every animal and every plant that ever happened. And the idea is, of course, there was nobody. He knows everything. He did not need one person to instruct him. He made the whole thing. And right now, he is sustaining the whole thing. The universe is not on autopilot. God keeps it going every second of the day. In fact, you are not on autopilot. You tend to think you are, but you're not. God is keeping every breath happening in your body every moment of the day. And if God took his mind off you, then you would stop breathing. It's not automatic. God makes it happen. In fact, every atom in your body, you understand the basic things of atoms. There's a gooby in the middle and little goobies going around the outside. That's technical science talk. Don't get confused. You understand the atom? Gooby in the middle and little goobies going around the outside. God keeps every atom in your body with all the goobies spinning at exactly the right speed. And if God were to take his mind off you for a millisecond, you would simply collapse. The structure of your body would disappear. Every atom in Ben's body is being kept spinning at exactly the right speed so that you survive and prosper as God's person. Every atom in James's body over there, God is paying attention to it and ensuring that even the most minuscule part of your body, that it's all happening correctly so that you are sustained to be the brilliant person that you are. And whoever you are here this morning, if God took his mind off you for a millisecond, you would cease to exist. He knows everything, he created everything, and he sustains everything. In fact, he is bigger than anything. Let's have a look at verse 15. Surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. Lebanon is not sufficient for all the fires, nor its animals enough for burnt offerings. Before God, all the nations are nothing. They are regarded by him as worthless and less than nothing. Can we just have a look at that? And I want to suggest to you, God is bigger than you have ever imagined. Verse 15, surely the nations are like a drop in the bucket. Now think of like the mightiest nations on this planet. Think of the most populated nations on this planet. Think of the wealth of all the nations on this planet. Think of their mighty nuclear arsenals. Think of their mighty attack forces. Think of how magnificent some of the nations on this planet really are. The Bible says that those nations to God are like a drop in a bucket. Have you ever had to carry a bucket full of water? Like, you're careful, you fill it up, you've got to walk along, you've got to take the bucket somewhere else. And as you walk, it just swirls around a little bit and just a little drop just falls out. Like it's nothing. I mean, who cares if one drop goes out of a bucket? It's insignificant. Isaiah shows us that the nations of the world, the mightiest might that we can come up with to God is like that drop in the bucket. Something he wouldn't even notice if he didn't want to. Absolutely nothing. The nations are nothing. Verse 15 again. They are regarded as dust on the scales. Have you ever bought anything that had to be weighed on a scale before you bought it? There's a place in Castle Towers that sells chocolate fudge. It is really nice, and they'll slice some off for you, and they sell it by the 100 gram. And depending on how much is on the scale, that's how much you pay. Can you imagine you go in to buy some of your favourite chocolate fudge, and the little shop person cuts off a piece, puts it on the scale, and is weighing it, and you say, hang on! I'm not paying for that extra. You say, what? I can see one little piece of dust on the scale. That dust must weigh something, and I'm not going to be charged for that one tiny piece of dust. You wouldn't do it. One piece of dust on the scale is not going to make any difference at all to your chocolate fudge. But Isaiah tells us that the nations are like that little bit of dust on the scale. So insignificant, and yet for us, they're the biggest and baddest thing that we can imagine. God's bigger than the nations. Also, the idols are nothing. These are the false gods. Have a look here in verse 18. With whom then will you compare God? What image will you liken him to? As for an idol, a metal worker casts it, a goldsmith overlays it with gold and fashions silver chains for it. A person too poor to present such an offering selects wood that will not rot. They looked for a skilled worker. They set up an idol that will not topple. Throughout the years, people have tried to make little statues and things to say, this is like God. And God is saying, that's crazy. You get a little metal worker or a woodworker, they carve their little statue, they make it look pretty, and they say, look, this is God. Oops, it's just fallen over. Let's just pick God up for a moment. Let's just carve away a little bit and give God. That is craziness. How could you treat God like that? How many of you here have been to Bali? Come on, all the Bali, all the jet setters. Oh, look at them all. It's a Hindu part of the world. And if you've ever seen it, every place has their little statues. Like every house will have a little statue, and every shop has got a little statue. But you've got to understand, a little statue is only God over a certain area. So you might have a God over your front yard. You might have a separate God over your backyard. You have a God for the lounge room. You have a God for the toilet. You have like all these little gods everywhere. You go into any shop and there's a little statue out the front. There's a statue for the front of the shop. There's a God for the back of the shop. And every day, 3 times a day, they go and dress the little statue, put little ribbons on it, dress it up in nice little clothes, and they bring out food for it to offer to God 3 times a day. And I was there and I looked at it and I thought, what sort of a God is that you've got to dress him 3 times a day? That you've got to offer him a little plate of food, that your God is so unpowerful that you've got to have a different God for the front yard than a God for your backyard. Now, you would look at that and say, that is crazy. We would never do that. We would never think that we could offer God something. We could never think we could make God happy by just shouting lots of noise when we praise his name. We would not think that we would dress God up by showing up at every Christian activity that ever existed. We would not think we're doing God a favour by reading his word and having a perfect record. We would never think we could demean God and treat him as something that we are in control of and that we dress up and that we make him happy. Isaiah is clear. Compared with God, the idols are nothing. In fact, we are nothing. Verse 21. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. Its people are like grasshoppers. Can you picture how big a semi-trailer is? Like imagine you're on Old Northern Road, Showground Road, Windsor Road, and there's a huge semi-trailer coming through laden with goods. It's kind of big. And if you were standing on the curb right next to it, you would see how big and how mighty it is. But if you've taken off in a plane recently and you look out the window as you climb, suddenly all those really big things start to look like little Matchbox toys. It's like a little toy set is down there. And the huge semi-trailer is now a little tiny toy truck. And the people look like grasshoppers. Can you imagine from God's perspective? I might think I'm doing brilliantly well. I might think I am magnificent, that I'm achieving wonderful things for eternity. And when God looks down, I actually look like a grasshopper. Verse 22, he sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and he stretches out the heavens like a canopy, spreads them out like a tent to live in. Who's been camping recently? Come on, the family got the tents out and you went off somewhere. Okay. Thank you. You realise how hard it is to put a tent up? Even if it's one of those new fandangle I spring to life tents, you gotta nail it down, you gotta put the spikes in, you gotta make sure you know that it's not flooding. Can you imagine the work in putting a tent up? The Bible says here that God puts up the sky like it's a tent. God's gone camping and he simply puts up the sky like a tent and a covering. He is absolutely amazing. In fact, world rulers are nothing. Look at verse 23. He brings princes to naught. He reduces the rulers of the world to nothing. Who would be like one of the most important people on the planet? I don't know. Who would it be? Barack Obama? Oprah Winfrey? Julia Gillard, Kim Kardashian, Kyle Sandilands. Just try and think of someone that you reckon's pretty important in the world. Maybe it's a rock star. Maybe it's a sporting star. Maybe it's someone who's almost like your hero. The person that you would love to meet. The person you'd take a photo and post it on Facebook and say, me and a famous person. Who is that? Who would you bow down before and simply say, I am not worthy? Whose posters do you put on the wall in your bedroom? When I was a teenager growing up in the 60s, I can tell you who was on my wall in my bedroom. Bobby Fulton. You're thinking, who? He played 5'8" for the Manuringa Sea Eagles. Seriously, one of the best rugby league players I'd ever seen. His photo was on my wall. I tell you who else made it into the poster department in Tim's teenage bedroom. The Beatles. Seriously, like this was the 60s. They were the biggest thing that ever had this huge picture of John and Paul and George and Ringo. They were the people I put on my wall because they're the people that meant something to me. Think of the most powerful person, the person that you give the most respect to, the person on the planet that you would put their photo on the wall of your bedroom. And God says in verse 23, he reduces them to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, he blows on them and they wither away. You know, you get a new plant, you put it in the garden, and you don't look after it very well. And it starts to die. And a moment later, it's gone, it's dead. God says the great people in the world can be something just like that. God is bigger than anyone, and yet he knows his creation personally. Look down in verse 25. To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal, says the Holy One? Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one, and he calls forth each one of them by name because of his great power and might and strength. Not one of them is missing. It says here, he places each star in place. Look, verse 26. He brings out the starry host one by one. Go out one night when it's dark and see how many stars you can see. God placed every single one of them there. The second thing, it says there in verse 26, he calls each star by name. He calls forth each one of them by name. Can you imagine God doing that? Like I can't even remember your names. Can you imagine God naming and knowing every star and checking that every one is okay? That's the next thing he does. Look at the end of verse 26. Because of his great power and might and strength, not one of them is missing. He makes sure that every star keeps going. If it's time to finish its life, he makes that decision. Can you imagine God, at each night doing a little roll call, just checking that all the stars are there? Some of your leaders have trouble doing a little roll call in your cabin at night, making sure you're all in your room. Can you imagine God checking that every star was present? Now, you know enough about stars to know that our sun is a star. In fact, a rather small star. Every star you see up there is something like our sun. And like our sun, nearly every one of them can have a solar system of planets going around it. Can you imagine that? And God puts every one of them there. God calls them by name, and he makes sure it keeps going. Now, when you see the magnificence of God's creation, when you see how he is bigger than anything, when you see how he knows everything, when you see that there is nothing and no one who is even like him, why should he be interested in you? Why should he be concerned for one of his grasshoppers? Well, that's exactly the question he addresses. And he wants Isaiah to tell the people, God has not forgotten about you. Look at verse 27. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, my cause is disregarded? Because that's what they were saying. They were crying out to God saying, he doesn't care about me. He didn't answer my prayer. He wasn't there to help me when I really needed him. But I want to tell you from the Bible, God cares passionately about you. God cares about every single area of your life. If God can call out the stars by name and know them personally, he absolutely knows you personally and he knows you intimately. You matter to him. You are special. If God has a refrigerator, your photo is on the front of his refrigerator. You mean that much to him. And he's not too tired to help you. Look at verse 28. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He won't grow tired or weary. God is not too worn out to help you. He is the God of the universe. In fact, he will give you strength. Verse 29, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Now, I want you to note carefully what it says there. It doesn't say he will give strength to the weary. It doesn't say he might give strength to the weary. It doesn't say he used to give strength to the weary. It says he gives strength to the weary. Present tense. It is happening right now. And whatever you're feeling, God is there ready to give you strength so that you can deal with whatever happens. Because there's going to be some times when we fail. Even the strongest will fail. Look at verse 30. Even youths grow tired and weary. Young men stumble and fall. If you want a picture of like athletic excellence, it's you guys. It's your age group. You're hitting the peak of your physical development. All the energy in the world, all the enthusiasm in the world, and you guys rock as far as world strength and excitement goes. Even the young men, those testosterone factories manufacturing rippling muscles and there to conquer any obstacle that the world throws at them, even they would stumble and fall. Now, can I just say here, I'm not bad at the stumbling and falling department. Thank you to all of those who checked up with me. You may not have been aware, but when I went to walk on stage last night, you've got to understand multifocals. You know how people wear glasses? There's a magnification, and maybe you've got 1.5 magnification, maybe you've got a 2 times magnification. My glasses at the top for seeing everything is 5.5 times magnification, and at the bottom for reading, it's 8 times magnification. The most dangerous thing I can ever do is go up or down a step, because down here, I can't actually see where the step is. And last night, ready to march on in triumph, I went flat on my face, my glasses flew off, and if you want to see something funny, look for a person who needs glasses trying to find them when they've come off. Everything I had was under the stage. My son came out and helped me. I understand a little about stumbling and falling, but even the mightiest young man, even the mightiest athlete, even the mightiest sports person will have a moment when they stumble and fall. And you right now might feel like you have stumbled and you have fallen down. When I was there, I didn't know what had happened. I couldn't see because my glasses were on. I'd lost what I had. I'd hit my gum up here. I didn't know if it was bleeding. Some of you feel that you're like that right now. Life has just knocked you down. Life has given you a serve and you're lying there thinking, I don't know if I even want to get up. Where is God when things are going wrong in my life? Oh, God is not just bigger than you can imagine. It's not just He knows more than you can imagine. He cares about you more than you could ever imagine. And even when you're flat on your face, wondering where He is, God assures us, I am with you and I will never leave you. So when things go wrong, and I know that's for so many of you, things aren't working out right now. I love listening to you, I love interacting with you, but I know some of you are facing difficult stuff. It's like there are storms raging around you. And when there's a storm going on, life gets pretty tough. It gets unpredictable. It's not very pleasant and you want it to stop. And I don't know what those storms are for you. Maybe it's got to do with stuff at home. Maybe it's got to do with stuff at school. Maybe it's got to do with stuff with your friends. Or maybe it's got to do with stuff that is deep inside that you don't know you could ever tell anyone. But I want to say, on the authority of the Bible, whatever storm you are facing at the moment, God is bigger than that storm. Whatever obstacle has been thrown in your way, God is bigger than that obstacle. Whatever difficulties lie just ahead of you, God is way bigger than that difficulty. Whatever storm you find yourself in, God is bigger than that storm. So stop telling your God how big your storm is. Start telling your storm how big your God is. All right, stop telling your God how big your storm is. Start telling your storm how big your God is. Because, verse 29, He gives strength to the weary. He increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary. Young men will stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. I know you might be facing difficulties right now. I know you might feel abandoned. I know you might be facing a ferocious storm around you. But whatever storm you're facing, God is bigger than that storm. Stop telling your God how big your storm is. Start telling your storm how big your God is. Thanks very much.